She didn't scream.
Do you believe
at the moment,
you have
yes.
the right man?
At the moment, yes. We found nothing that Christian B couldn't be the murderer. There's no alibi or something like that.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, his words are pretty interesting, aren't they? Where he says, and even the question is sketched in a kind of cryptic way. Do you believe you have the right man? The right man for what? You know, ask the question directly, and then his answer is kind of cryptic as well. At the moment, yes. Why does he need to qualify that? Why not just say, yes, I think we've got the right guy. I think we do have the murderer of Madeline McCann, right? The other thing that he volunteers, and I mean, he can choose any words, any combination of words that he wants to, but he goes off with, we found nothing. And so he's basically making a negative argument. He's saying, we found nothing to show that he didn't commit this crime, which is totally different from saying, we found something that shows that he did. Does that make sense? Now, not having an alibi is an important point, but there are also many, many people who don't have alibis and they nevertheless aren't guilty of committing crimes, such as Santa Claus in the JonBenet Ramsey case. But in terms of this case, after the past few days, I've been trying to build a case for how and why the media played the part they played in this case. I've also tried to stress the harmful role the media played in basically fucking up the whole investigation. And I wanted to put this in context, the past media coverage, in context ahead of the so-called prime suspect finally standing trial tomorrow on Friday the 16th. And I think when you do put it into context, you sort of realize there's another crime that's sort of taking place, a crime, or certainly something that's not entirely honest or not entirely above board. It certainly seems that way. And that is the pursuit of a particular individual without evidence. And then even when it comes down to him standing trial, there's still no evidence, and yet you continue to pursue him regardless. Based on what? Well, to some extent based on the words of a prosecutor. And is that sufficient evidence for the media? Should it be? And so I wanted to deal with the 60 Minutes Australia 20-minute news story on Bruckner, which came out 2 days ago at the time of writing. And of course, all timed to coincide with Bruckner's trial. And so what we're going to deal with here are 6 things wrong with 60 Minutes' McCann theory. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. I'll also put a link to the 60 Minutes documentary in the description so you can watch that. And let's get started. Number 1, Helga Busching is not a new witness.
New witness speak.
In the first 8 seconds, they describe a new witness, someone apparently breaking his silence. And then about a minute later, they're also describing as breaking his silence for the first time.
In their pursuit of the truth about her death. And that's because of the evidence of their star witness, who tonight speaks publicly for the first time.
So if you're taking notes, it's this idea that Helga Busching is a new witness and also he's breaking his silence for the first time. And you would imagine that those two would go together. If he's a new witness, well, surely he is breaking his silence for the first time. Well, that's strange because 8 months ago, not 8 days ago, not 8 weeks ago, but almost half a year ago, in June last year, Helga Busching broke his silence then. And guess what he said then? Exactly the same thing that he said here, that Bruckner told him Madeline didn't scream. Busching reminds me of Gary Oliver's less famous correspondent, someone who is eager to inveigle himself into the media narrative. There's also a certain it takes a thief to know a thief aspect to this, meaning if Busching is a former pal of Bruckner, then that's his CV. Does that make him a credible witness? Does anyone talk about that? Does anyone talk about Bruckner is a certain kind of person and Bushing is his pal who's now turning on him, well, what kind of pal is he? Is he someone, an upstanding member of society? Also, Bushing's reasoning and thus that of the media trumpeting his cause, like, if I can be honest, I feel like Bushing's reasoning is a little bit that of a simpleton, and then to take that simpleton reasoning and adopt it wholesale seems to show that somebody who would do that is being a little bit simple-minded themselves. Because you need to think about this critically. It's not just a little faulty to say, bear in mind, in the Oliva case, he said, I hurt a little girl. That's then taken as absolute evidence. You don't need anything else. You don't need DNA, fingerprints, a witness, a motive, anything. Just that little statement, oh, that's now absolute evidence in the John Benet Ramsey case. That's preposterous. And so Bushing's Damascus moment is that Bruckner said she didn't scream, and that now somehow equates in his mind to a confession. But let me ask you, let's say we put you into an interrogation cell and we asked you a simple question. As far as you know, did Madeline scream? As far as everything you've read, everything you've understood about this case, did Madeline scream? In any of the literature anywhere, is there any talk of someone hearing a child scream? Did Jane Tanner hear a child scream? Did the other witness? Did anyone? Did the screaming awaken the twins? And so by the very nature of the narrative, the fact that there wasn't crying, that there wasn't even the twins waking up, and it's as a result of that the sedative narrative arose, right? And so it's no mystery, it's nothing new really that Madeline didn't scream, or for that matter, the twins. Also, if the tapas group were doing a constant musical chairs thing, with someone constantly moving through the complex like a sort of a series of Mario Brothers overdosed on Red Bull, just sort of hyperactively running around all the levels, did any of them hear anything? Did any Ocean Club staff member hear anything? And so it's not rocket science to assume Madeline didn't scream. And so if it's not rocket science to assume Madeline didn't scream, then how can you say it's rocket science that that statement somehow gives somebody making that statement exclusive guilty knowledge? It doesn't. Also, let's say I assume from South Africa that Madeline didn't scream. Does that then make me a prime suspect? Anyone who assumes Madeline doesn't scream, does that suddenly elevate them to a prime suspect? That's why I say it's not very sophisticated thinking or reasoning that's taking place here. Number two, the evidence we have, there's no doubt.
Evidence we have, there's no doubt.
You have said, Mr. Walters, that you have concrete evidence that Christian B abducted Maddie McCann.
Yes, because she was not murdered in the hotel.
That seems to be an inference, basically saying she doesn't seem to be there, so she's not there. That means she has to have been abducted. But the next question then is, do you have any evidence that she was abducted?
I cannot speak about these things.
Now, if you note at this point in the episode, it's about 18 minutes, Walters has a kind of a slight smile on his face. So let's review what we're talking about here. There's the evidence we have, there's no doubt. And then from that to him acknowledging there's a lot of doubt after about 20 minutes. I mean, there's enough doubt that prevented them from bringing charges against Madeline. So let's stop fucking around here. If there wasn't any doubt, Bruckner, who has been charged, would be charged for a crime for which there is little doubt. The fact that he hasn't been charged in more than 3 years shows there is doubt. There is no evidence of an abductor in this case, no signs of a break-in, no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. That was true in the beginning, and that is true now. One can't even postulate that because Bruckner lived in the area, and it's quite interesting that he apparently worked at the Ocean Club as well at one point, but one can't postulate that there's circumstantial evidence implicating him, because there isn't. there is speculation. That's it. But speculation isn't evidence. I know a lot of people in social media and the true crime community think if you think someone did something, that means they did it. If you believe someone did something, that's enough. But speculation isn't evidence, and it shouldn't be evidence, and it seems the media and a certain fraction of people still haven't figured out how the law and how court cases work.
It doesn't matter what I believe. It only matters what I can prove. So please don't tell me what I know and don't know. I know the law.
Number 3, the prime suspect in her abduction and presumed murder.
The prime suspect in her abduction and presumed murder.
That should really be presumed abduction and speculated murder. To be honest, I'm appalled that the reporter even says this. Who said Bruckner is the prime suspect? I mean, based on what is Bruckner the prime suspect? Did the lead detective, Gonzalo Amaral, ever think so or say so? Did the McCanns ever think so or say so? Do the Portuguese police consider him as such? If the British media refer to him as a prime suspect, does that make him a prime suspect? Maybe in the minds of the public, but that wouldn't make him very special at all. Tannerman was a prime suspect for 5 years before he disappeared in a poof of phantasmic smoke. Bruckner isn't even halfway to disappearing from the prime suspect list. Also, her abduction has never been proven unless watching a Netflix docuseries that incidentally cost £1 million per episode. You know, that docuseries doesn't suddenly constitute legal evidence. If Madeline's abduction hasn't been proven, then her murder hasn't been proven even less. No one that knows this case very well or is very involved in it believes Madeline was murdered. Not Detective Amaral, not the McCanns, nor I, for that matter. Interestingly, when asked what evidence there is of Madeline's murder, the prosecutor suddenly appears a little bashful, and he should. I think the reason he can't say is because he doesn't have any proof. If he had proof, there would be charges. I also think the prosecutor is perhaps one of those people who dismisses the cadaver dog evidence, because you can only do that and say she was not murdered in the hotel if you flat out dismiss the dog evidence. This in a nutshell shows, in my opinion, the quality of his reasoning process. And what do we always say on this channel?
When one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David.
Or more precisely, when one note is off, it destroys the whole symphony. Hans Christian Wolters. Number 4. Now, while it's technically not about Madeline, those are actually words from this episode on 60 Minutes.
While it's not technically about Madeline.
Why let that get in the way of a good story? Number 5. The truth about her death.
A pursuit of the truth about her death.
This is ultimately a very ironic comment because it's at least one aspect the speculation I think gets right. Madeline, I think, is no longer alive. And I'm assuming they think if she was taken by someone like Bruckner, she would be dead, and yet I don't believe murder is a charge he's been charged with. So the prosecutor is going after Bruckner and believing him to be guilty of a crime that would eclipse all the others. This would be if he committed murder against Madeline, this would be the worst crime of all the crimes that he's associated with, except he doesn't have any evidence to prove it. Now, the idea of Madeline no longer being alive is also one the McCanns themselves strongly oppose, which is why they have been loath to touch what must feel like a radioactively toxic hot potato. I mean, you would think if there's so much interest in Christian Bruckner, why wouldn't Madeline's parents show some form of interest, perhaps visit him in prison, perhaps try and get a statement, perhaps meet with him in person, maybe if it's not him, perhaps he knows something. Well, the problem with that is if they accept Madeline is dead, it'll trigger an inquest, which effectively means they will be investigated all over again. Incredibly, just days after the incident, the McCanns told the world they believed Madeline was safe. That's in a blog post dated 19 May 2007. Mr. McCann said, "Until there is concrete evidence to the contrary, we believe Madeline is safe and is being looked after." Now, does that kind of reasoning, did that make sense on the 19th of May? And does that kind of reasoning make sense today? Just because a doctor says something like that doesn't mean it is sensible. And this reminds me, and I say this with compassion, it reminds me of Mo Wilson's mother who described her daughter as being safe in heaven. Can I offer a little reality? If someone goes missing for 1 year, 7 years, 17 years, or if they die, that doesn't mean they are safe or okay. And even if you say they are safe or okay, probably if you that person, you wouldn't say that about yourself. And so I would argue that's a kind of madness to pretend otherwise. Number 6.
And that's because of the evidence of their star witness, who tonight speaks publicly for the first time.
Now, I dealt with this in point number 1, but if in the opening minute, and incidentally, pretty much all 6 of these bullshit flags are to do with just the first 66 seconds of the bogus episode, there is something that I've quoted that comes up in the 18th minute, but otherwise, all of this is just the first minute. So, you've got all of these sort of bullshit indicators. If you're making so many factual errors, how reliable really is your reporting? And you can't say because a prosecutor told you something is true, it's true. It's true if you can prove it. If you go into a court setting and a prosecutor says something, it's only going to have legal probative value if somebody else agrees with him in a court setting. If he specifically can't prove it, or if he won't prove it, or if he says that he can't, or he can't speak about it, then how do you report on this nonsense with a straight face? Bruckner is on trial as the prime suspect of Madeline McCann, except Bruckner isn't on trial as the prime suspect of any crime related to Madeline McCann. That should be the headline. Which person in their right mind would read a story like that? And let's release a story timed to coincide with Bruckner's standing trial, only not standing trial about the crime you're trying to associate him with. And you just constantly see his face associated with Madeline McCann. It's a false association. Incidentally, the bullshit about a breaking news story in February 2024, this thing about I'm talking about Helga Busching, the first time he ever said anything. He came out in September 2020. That's about 4 years ago. Now, this section is titled, Tonight Speaks Publicly for the First Time. Now, how can that be if he spoke out in September 2020, 4 years ago? And it was bogus then, and it's bogus now. But do you notice more than a little exaggeration and manipulation in the way this is presented? Or am I wrong? Is it presented in a way that's totally fair and accurate and unbiased? Does the analysis that you hear here say anything about Busching being regarded as flaky and a bullshitter? Maybe that is part of the narrative that also needs to be acknowledged. Something I mentioned earlier on in this analysis as well. If you're not going to say that, maybe one can say, if you're going to repeat this as gospel, a story that has been floating around for 3 or 4 years and still hasn't gotten anywhere, but you're selling it as a huge exclusive scoop, perhaps that's more than a little flaky too. So I'm not going to take it further than that, but I do think this is a prescient example of just how harmful and unhelpful the media can be at contaminating a narrative surrounding a particular case just because the public and the media want to believe something to be true, all evidence to the contrary. But there's quite a lot of compelling circumstantial evidence. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.